Okay, welcome everybody to our solution seminar. This week we have a panel of 3 presenters, and they'll each give a short presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer session with all 3 of them. So our presenters tonight are going to be Dr. Ida Kubiszweski over here. Not yet, you can stay seated. I've known Ida for 4 or 5 years now. She was actually a PhD student of mine at the University of Vermont in ecological economics. And she's now a assistant research professor here at the Institute for Sustainable Solutions. I'm Bob Costanza, by the way. I failed to mention that. Also from the Institute. We actually worked together on a project in the Lower Mekong Basin looking at alternative planning approaches to hydropower developments. So she's going to talk a little bit about that. Keith Nevison is going to be our second speaker. Keith is an honors undergrad student in environmental science. He's also founded the Eco Restoration Guild at PSU and is part of the Sustainability Leadership Center, and is also the student garden liaison. So he's doing the Oak Savannah installation at the SRTC building. He's going to talk a little bit about, I think, dam removal, and whereas Ida's going to talk about some plans that have been looked at to put in a bunch of dams in the Lower Mekong Basin, and I think you'll see from that comparison why that may not be such a great idea. And finally we'll have Julia Babcock. She works for Oregon Solutions, and you probably all know a little bit about Oregon Solutions. If not, she'll probably tell you a little bit more. But they use this collaborative governance model for state and local level problem solving. She got her master's degree in urban and regional planning at PSU, but she also has a degree from the University of Florida. I should mention that. And so she's going to talk about a ATA course project that they did in Vietnam, in Hoi An City in Vietnam. That was a multi-stakeholder event that facilitated, PSU faculty and staff and students working together with local faculty and staff to try and solve some of the local development problems there. So all 3 of these will, I think, form an interesting perspective on some development issues and some restoration and, if you will, undevelopment issues here in the Pacific Northwest. So we'll start with Ida.
Good evening. As Bob said, this was a project we did earlier this year, and it was a project for the USAID, basically, looking at hydropower development in the Lower Mekong Basin. Sure. I like to move around. Okay. So basically, the Lower Mekong Basin is the area in red. As you see, the area in green up there, I don't have a pointer, marked out as the Upper Mekong Basin. Most of the Upper Basin is in China, where it does have quite a few dams on the mainstream. However, the Lower Mekong Basin currently doesn't have any dams on the mainstream. It does have dams on some of the side rivers going into the mainstream. However, right before the Vietnam War, they had planned to put in about 11 dams onto the mainstream, and then the Vietnam War happened. And all of a sudden, all these plans came to a halt. In the past 10, 15 years, somebody found these plans, basically dusted them off and go, hey, let's build them. And the problem is that they're still trying to build them in the same fashion that they used to build dams about 50 years ago. And so this is one of the things we looked at. They have the 4 countries in the Lower Mekong Basin are Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Those 4 countries make up the Mekong River Commission, which basically requires the 4 countries to come together and before they make any changes to the mainstream to inform the other 3 countries. They don't have to get permission from the other 3 countries, they do have to inform the other 3 countries. One of the other things that the Mekong River Commission does is it produces the Basin Development Plan. It basically tries to plan the next 5 to 30 years of what will happen with the mainstream. And so the Mekong River Commission focuses only on the mainstream, not on any of the side waterways. The first BDP basically was created recently in 2010, and it looked at multiple scenarios throughout the basin, depending on what each of the country wanted. The goal of the basin was not just, of the BDP, was not just to look at hydropower. It was look to anything that affected the mainstream. So that included irrigation, floodplain management, etc. And so this was done in 2010. The next iteration will be in 2015. Our objective basically was look at this plan, but also there was an environmental study done by outside consultants, and to look at these 2 reports and basically look at the assumptions made in them and to do a sensitivity study. So not necessarily saying that anything they did was wrong, but basically looking at, okay, so if you changed this assumption, what would your results be on the effects to the general population and well-being in that area? So the main report assessment we looked at the risk and uncertainty and discounting of the future. We looked at internalizing some of the costs, the environmental costs, integrating the whole system better, and the fisheries, which is one of the biggest ecosystem services in that area. Okay, so a little background. So if you could see here, I'm not going to walk around because I need to stay by my mic, but the red dots you see right there are the proposed hydropower dams. The black stars are, do you have a pointer? Okay, I guess not. The black stars are where there are environmental hotspots, basically. So you can see that in a lot of instances, they do overlap quite nicely, unfortunately, but they are spread out. Majority of the dams that will go in will be into Laos, and then Thailand will be planned on getting no dams, and then a few in Vietnam and Cambodia over the years. However, the first few would go into Laos. Okay, so numbers: 11 dams. Would produce about 23 to 28% of the hydropower potential for the 4 countries. Population, about 30 million people living within 15 kilometers, 2.1 within the local riparian communities living within 5 kilometers, and then over 100,000 would have to be resettled if these dams went in. It is the largest freshwater fishery in the world. Okay, so when I say that, to give you a perspective, they did this measurement where they took one point in the Columbia River and looked at how much biomass went through the Columbia River at that one point. They did the same study on the Mekong and found that at the same amount of biomass went through the Mekong in 1 hour as in a full year on the Columbia. So that's the kind of difference. Okay, so what did we find? We looked at the assumptions, and we had about a month to do this entire report. And so we had to pick and choose which aspects we focused on, and there's a lot of things we ignored that do need to be looked on. So social issues, a lot of the indirect benefits and costs were never looked at, which do have to be taken into account, but we just did not have the time. So what we chose was to look at the discount rate. In the reports, they used a 10% discount rate on everything. They used 3 kilograms of $3. Sorry, they used a $0.8 per kilogram for the fisheries, both captured aquaculture and reservoir fisheries. We changed it to $3 per kilogram. They assumed that aquaculture could replace a majority of the lost fisheries, and then they assumed a lower value in hectare per year in wetlands. So at the end of the study, basically, they found that the profit, so that included some of the environmental costs, but a lot of the profit came from just the money, the financial benefits of selling the electricity, was about $33 billion. If we change some of the assumptions, so made the discount rate 1%, some of the prices on some of the ecosystem services, we found that it could potentially be up to a almost $300 billion loss for that region, which is a significant error bar, basically. How do I go down? Okay, so discount rate. Those that don't know, very quickly, basically what the discount rate does is it looks at how much you value the future. The higher discount, basically, so if you have, well, I'm not going to go into this really quickly because I'm, I think, already going over, but what we found was that if you look at the red bar right here, is that showing? Yep. You find that the positive, so we looked at 3 scenarios. They looked at 11. We picked 3 on sort of one all the way on the front. So basically, definite future meant 1 dam, then 6 dams, and 11 dams. So they found that it could be in the 11 dams, a $33 billion. This is in millions, so $33 billion gain. While we found that it could be up to negative about $300 billion. And then this is also interesting, is who the winners and losers are within those 4 countries. And if those dams were built, which of those 4 countries would win out and which one would lose most? And I'll show graphs really quickly about this. So, okay, so comparison. The originals are in blue. The new revised numbers are in red. So if you look at the 10%, this shows when we did not make any changes to the discount rate. We left it at 10%, but what we did change was the amount used for fisheries. And we chose that by looking at the current market average price of fish on the market. Wetlands, we took an average from various studies done around the world in similar climates. And a few other minor changes. So this is just prices. But you can see the difference that the discount makes and how much you do look at the future, how much it matters. And so you could see a significant decrease as the discount rate decreases as well. Here are some of the specific aspects of it. So this is the total economic impact. So you could see that the largest positive aspect is the hydropower generated and it's selling to the other countries. Largest negative is the captured fisheries. There are other positives, so reservoir fisheries, for example, that would go up and that would be a benefit, as would some agriculture, so on. This is at 10%. If you move on and look at 3% discount rate, this changes significantly. So you see that the captured fisheries value significantly decreases. So the hydropower, reservoir fisheries, et cetera, stay similar, but that changes your total economic impact. And then 10%, and you see even a more significant change. So with winners and losers, what do you have? So you see these are the scenarios at 10% discount rate, definite future, 6 dams, 11 dams. You see that in all of them, the dark blue, Laos definitely benefits from this. They get the majority of the dams. They get most of the money from selling the electricity. You see if Vietnam also gains in some of the scenarios, and that's a lot of that is due to reservoir fisheries, and they have the primary place where they do agriculture in that region. But you see that the total economic value, the light blue, for when you add up all 4 countries, it is positive. However, if you change it down to 3% and then 1%, that significantly changes. Laos still is a winner in these 2 scenarios because with 6 dams and 11 dams, they have a lot of electricity to sell. But the overall, if you look at all 4 countries, overall, the region, there's a significant decline. Okay, I'm almost done. I got 2 more slides. Okay, so what our key recommendations was. We weren't in the position, and our goal wasn't to say build the dams or don't build the dams. Our position with USAID was to give them the report and let them make a decision on what to do. So our key recommendations was that the human and natural systems, that whole system and framework needed to be looked at more integratively. So everything was connected, basically. That risk and uncertainty had to be taken into account. So you don't know that agriculture will be able to replace everything, and you don't know what exactly the discount rate is. So why not provide us sort of a range of options and make a decision from that? Make sure to take in both the indirect and direct costs. Don't just assume that the only thing that will be affected is things you see. A broad scenario of embodied alternate model development. So basically, look at the models, see how everything interconnects. Have a broader set of scenarios. Don't assume that those are the only options, is building those dams. Are there alternative energy sources that can be utilized? What else can be done in the region? And then, who are the winners and losers? Right now, a lot of these dams, when that money gets sold, a lot of rich people will make even a lot more money. What will happen to the communities in that region? Will they have to move? Will they be flooded out? What will be the social impacts? So these are the authors of the report. It was a USAID report. Bob Costanza, myself, and Shapressa Halimi, Peter Packett from Northwest Power, and Jeffrey King were part of it. And then some social aspects were done by a group from Thailand. So, where are you? Okay. And thank you.
All right.
Hold on, let me set that up for you.
So actually, I'm going to go ahead and, let's see. Thank you, Ida. Appreciate it. A little technologically illiterate here. There we go. All right. I got it. I think I got it. No, I don't. Well, I have a loud voice anyhow, so I can just project. Sure, we can try this one. You gotta hire Bob for this. Huh? Yeah. All right. So, very interesting study there. Relevant today, actually, marked the removal of the Condit Dam on the White Salmon River, and that's what I'm going to kind of show a little video about. First, I'm going to start with the backstory about the history of the Condit Dam and why it was removed today, and then I'm going to show you guys a video of it actually getting removed, and then maybe talk a little bit about other issues related to why we are choosing to have dam removal in the Pacific Northwest and why other parts of the world are choosing to put them in.
Then just give it a few wraps around that cleat. Yeah.
Within our power, we are going to try to capture every single fish. We won't, but we're going to do our best. These fish are extremely fragile. They get a little too much handling. They might die.
Grab this one.
This is a fish that's 4 and 5 years old. It's not something we take lightly.
There's a reason these endangered salmon are getting a ride.
Fire in the hole!
Historically, you go back over 100 years ago, the white salmon flowed right through here. It was a neat little canyon. And in 1913, we built Condit Dam.
Constructed to help electrify a developing region, Northwestern Lake and the dam that created it are coming out. Condit Dam was completed in 1913. 12.5 stories tall and 400 feet across, one of the largest of its era.
As far as dam decommissioning, dam removals, this is one of the big ones.
Glacier cold water plunging 45 miles from the river's source on the shoulders of Mount Adams is captured here, 3 miles above its mouth at the Columbia River. Condit diverts water from the reservoir into a mile-long wood pipeline that delivers it to a Pacific Core powerhouse. At full capacity, 2 turbines produce about 14 megawatts, enough to power 7,000 homes. There's just one problem.
Right now, fish can make it all the way up to the big plunge pool down at the base of the dam, and oftentimes when I'm standing up on the dam looking down, I can see them swimming around.
A ladder providing fish with passage over the dam was part of the original structure. A storm destroyed it in the first year, and later a second one also washed out. When Condit's operating license came up for renewal, agencies required construction of a passage system to reduce impacts on fish, but the cost was prohibitive.
It was not a good deal for our customers. So for us, it was really a business decision to move towards decommissioning.
Contractors will tunnel through Condit and drain the lake in 2011. In 2012, the dam will be demolished and its concrete used to recontour the site for planting with native species. As removal begins, the water level is lowered just 10 feet to keep the work area dry below the dam. But for lakeside residents who witness the drawdown, change already is dramatic.
Northwestern Lake became White Salmon River right before our eyes. It started to make a sound, and the sound was a sound of rapids, and it was sounding like a typical river. One of the most spectacular things I've ever witnessed in my life.
To empty the lake completely, contractors must drill and blast a tunnel through the base of the dam, a 90-foot thick wall of concrete built to endure the ages.
We will use probably about 3,000 pounds of explosives. You don't do a lake tap every day. These are very infrequent. This is something you can't do incorrectly because you only get one shot at it. First of all, we have to design the number of holes that are needed to be drilled, the type of explosives that go into the hole, how much of each type of explosive that goes into the hole, and then it's timing.
Each of 15 blasts leading to the breach is a cascade of explosions, timed precisely to create an opening 18 feet wide, 13 feet tall, sized and positioned to evacuate water and sediment quickly.
It's going to be like pulling the plug on a bathtub. All the water behind me will drain down just like a bathtub would in about 6 hours.
About 2 million cubic yards of material has collected in the mile-long reservoir. And just behind the dam, a 5-story wedge of silt. Much of this will also be on the move.
There's no doubt that it's going to be a muddy river when this gets released. It's going to have a consequence to the environment in the lower 3 miles of the river, but then it's going to be short-lived.
Got a wild female. 91.
Biologists have spent 60 months on a plan to protect salmon from sediment.
Most of these fish are 25, 30. We moved a 45-pound fish. At the end of the day, I am absolutely exhausted.
Tule Fall Chinook are also known as white salmon. These are descendants of the ancient wild creatures for which the river is named.
They're big because they had to move big cobble and big gravel. We have moved fish this year that have tails that are the size of both of my hands. Lewis and Clark, when they came through, they would have seen these fish being harvested in the mouth of the White Salmon River.
Released above Condit, they will spawn in time to produce a new generation, emerging from the gravels after a century of absence, just as the dam disappears.
When the dam comes out, the habitat for Tule Fall Chinook salmon will double.
Biologists expect their numbers in the river, now around 1,000 in a typical year, could also double. Coho and steelhead will increase too. Soon, the white salmon will be a different place.
And it is already on its way after today. So at noon today it was blown up, and I'll just show you guys what that looked like. why, you might ask, are we blowing up dams here in the Northwest and talking about building monumental scale dams on the Lower Mekong? And one of the reasons is because of environmental protections that we have, in particular the Endangered Species Act. So one of the main motivations with the dam relicensing was that it didn't make any provision to save endangered species, endangered runs of salmon in the Lower Columbia Basin. So that's, in order to rebuild a fish ladder, it was going to cost Pacific Corp 3 times as much money as blowing it up. So it just kind of illustrates an important point that we need to look at ecosystem services when we take any kind of analysis of large-scale environmental impacts. And so, yeah, I'll be on the panel if you guys want to ask any further questions, but that's all I have for today. So.
So you have to press the down key.
We're gonna have to go back to this level. So I'll be fairly brief, and I'll be switching gears also. I'll be talking about a process that was sponsored by ISS and UN Habitat that Portland State faculty, staff, and students took part in this summer in Hoi An in central Vietnam. And Hoi An is embarking on a new journey for Asian countries. It's a World Heritage Site. This is a picture of the old town down on the riverfront, and it's the first Asian city that is home to a World Heritage Site that is also aspiring to be an eco-city. So how do we keep these social, cultural values while also expanding economically and respecting the environment? And Hoi An is in a river basin. It's the, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's Thu Va Bon River Basin. And so it acts sort of as a sink in the region. And so it has a lot of flooding issues. And there's a rainy season from September to January. And every year the city floods. And this is a problem for human health because there isn't a overall sewage system. It's done on a septic tank basis for development that can afford to have a septic tank system. But so it has a lot of flooding issues and climate adaptation issues. Vietnam in general is among the top 10 countries in the world that is going to face some of the major flooding issues from sea level rise. So they have salinization issues in their agricultural areas, and so they have quite a lot of environmental issues facing them in terms of climate adaptation. And so PSU's involvement started last summer when, after 2009, they were trying to get this eco-city concept together. Vietnam had adopted it nationally as a strategy that they wanted to start eco-city development, and Hoi An is one of the founding cities that is kind of wrestling with this concept and seeing what it means in this context. So PSU was chosen to present about what eco-cities mean in Portland, and also to design a workshop to try to engage local stakeholders in sort of a new way for Vietnam, where we have the community interacting with university partners both in Vietnam and from the United States, with local practitioners who are developing these plans to set priorities and make sound goals that will represent eco-city development. So this summer, we hosted the workshop, and we started with an asset-based mapping exercise so that the community stakeholders who aren't used to having their voices heard with local officials could talk to each other at sort of the community level. So we broke them up into neighborhoods, and this is a map of Hoi An. You can see all the waterways and how influential that is in shaping their topography. And these are the different communes and wards, and these are the comments that they put. We asked them to list 3 major assets within their community that, regardless of how much development or how much investment their community saw, what would they like to see stay the same. And so another thing that we brought to this workshop was the eco-district performance areas, which are part of their framework for eco-development. And we wanted to use a framework that was fairly innovative, and eco-districts really synthesizes a lot of different ideas, and it also has a lot to do with shared infrastructure. So Hoi An is sort of on this brink of major economic development. It's got this very big interest in tourism since it has this World Heritage Site. So they're seeing a lot of investment in infrastructure, and so how to make this infrastructure perform in a way that meets some of the environmental goals, but also has to deal with climate adaptation, which is something that we learned when going through this process that Portland doesn't talk a lot about. We don't face the same types of adaptation issues that other places do, and so that's something that we might want to consider in future iterations of the eco-district concept. But so we use these performance areas for an analysis of the goals that Hoi An had currently, and we worked through with the workshop participants about how their goals met these different performance areas to help sort of set guiding analysis for future plans. And then to ground that for the participants, we went through a project priority exercise to try to link the projects that were existing and proposed and to see which ones would meet the performance areas and also which ones were feasible. So it was really about giving them this model and helping them work through this model in an atmosphere that they weren't, that wasn't typical, to try to model this engagement between the public community stakeholders and local officials, sometimes with plans that they had never seen before. Projects that they hadn't seen were coming to their community, and so they were getting a chance to react in the planning phase together. So here's some pictures from the atelier. And if you would like to learn more about it, we are having a reflection session. If you'd like to get involved in future trips to Vietnam and the work that's taking place, then you can come this Friday to the Meyer Memorial Room and come hear more about the trip and a little more details. Thank you.
Thank you all. So if we can have our panelists come back up and continue the discussion. So you've seen some 3 different approaches to solutions. One, trying to better evaluate some big potentially harmful projects that are going on in the Lower Mekong. One, trying to restore a system to improve its ecosystem services and its value to society. And one about trying to engage the local community and thinking about how to plan for a better system. I think putting those 3 perspectives together gives us a better picture of what the possibilities are. So let's have some questions. Come on up to the mic and any questions or comments that you might have. And please say who you are.
My name is Sandy Robertson, and I'm actually from Stanford University. So, with respect to the atelier and Vietnamese, I know that Thais and Laotians don't like to argue, and so I don't know that much about Vietnamese, but I wonder if they can be as open in expressing their ideas as you would expect in American arts, and if that caused any issues.
Something that I learned culturally was it's a lot about saving face in the sense that you don't want to embarrass someone else, so you don't challenge their ideas in Vietnam. But I think we created an informal enough of a process that, and we created a system that was coming from outsiders, so it was very easy for us to have a discussion about sort of this outside system that took away the context of putting down any of the plans, but more of just a comparison to what other models were out there. So I think it tended to extinguish some of those cultural hesitancies to challenge ideas because it became less personal.
The environmental costs of the lost fish became much, much greater when you went from 10% to 1% discount. But it didn't seem to me that the economic benefits of the hydropower changed at quite the same level. So did I just not read your data right, or did I?
No, what we did was we changed the discount rate for the natural capital, so all the environmental aspects. Just because with the built capital, you still have to put in money basically to maintain and keep it up, so it does deteriorate. While natural capital doesn't. You don't have to put in the same amount of financial capital into it to keep it up. It actually, the more you leave it alone, the more it grows. So that's why we only changed the discount rate for the natural capital and left the built capital at 10%.
So, but it would also, the 1% discount rate for natural capital would also mean that once you lose it, you can't get it back as well, too, right?
Well, yeah, if you lose, you know, if your salmon go extinct, you can't really get those back.
Hi, Alex Zakaris. I'm a visitor with Political Science and ISS. This is for Ida. I'm just curious to hear a bit more about the political follow-through. So what do you expect USAID to do with the report, and then has there been any feedback from the involved governments, and what do you expect politically?
So that got actually a little bit crazy, even halfway through our report. So we were hired in about March, well, February-ish, to do this report. And we had about a month and a half to put together the first draft, and then it went to review to like 10 people, and then we had to make revisions. Somewhere near the end of that first draft, while it was in review and revision, it wasn't complete yet. Basically, things blew up in that region because Laos started building all the infrastructure for the dams. Hillary Clinton decided that the official U.S. policy was to tell that region to wait on building any hydropower dams until there was more information. The Mekong River Commission brought the 4 countries together. Thailand, who was actually paying for the dam and would be buying all the electricity, and Laos would be making that money. So those 2 countries said, we want to go ahead and build it. There won't be any environmental implications. And then Vietnam and Cambodia said, we really don't want this dam. So the whole situation kind of exploded, and all of a sudden, halfway through our report, which USAID was paying us to provide, they're like, write it, but we're just going to hide it. And so then it was, okay, well, we won't. So what do we do about this? So what we ended up doing was publishing it on the ISS website, and then distributing a massive email kind of pointing people to that with an area for comment. I believe it's still up there. Jenny would know better. But I believe it's still up there, the whole report to read. Then the Mekong River Commission had another meeting of those 4 countries, and basically they determined to postpone the decision of whether to allow, quote unquote, to agree for this dam to be built. Laos kept kind of developing all the infrastructure around it. They haven't started building the actual dam, but all the roads and all the equipment and everything are like right at the river and waiting. So that's where it stands, and I think the decision was postponed till next year.
Did any of the salmon die when they were being transported?
That's a really great question, actually. I don't think that, I actually overheard some people talking about how there wasn't really sufficient experimentation done in this particular project compared to on the Sandy River. I think that there's, what they did with transporting the salmon upstream has proven to be somewhat effective. There is a little bit of mortality with the salmon. Some of them do die. But by and large, it's worth the effort of bringing them upstream. Now it remains to be seen what happens after this explosion and rush of water, whether or not some of them spawn and some of the fry end up migrating back down to the Columbia River. So they say that they expect it to double the run. They also said in the video that it was expected that the lake would take 6 hours to drain. It actually took under 1 hour. So, and same thing with the Condit Dam, with the Marmot Dam on the Sandy that they blew up a few years ago. All of the science pointed to a slow reemergence of salmon. Well, it's exceeded all of their expectations. There's a lot more salmon coming up there than, so it just goes to show you that sometimes even the best science doesn't do the best job of sort of, predicting the results. Yeah. So.
Well, it goes back to the risk and uncertainty of we don't understand these systems and how they are integrated and how they connect well enough to be able to predict all the direct and indirect effects of putting in or taking out a dam. So. Yeah.
With reference to the Lower Mekong, not only is there not any sort of environmental standards, basic environmental standards to protect against the extinction of species, but a lot of these species don't do as well migrating, past these dams, whether or not they even have fish ladders. So we're talking about.
Yeah, the problem, so they do have, so basically what they did was when I said they dusted off the plans from the 1950s, I mean, literally, they're using the same design for the dams that were developed in the U.S. in the 1950s and planning on putting them onto the Mekong. So that includes a lot of the fish ladders. Those fish ladders were designed for salmon, which are one of the species that has the greatest, jumps amazingly over almost anything. And there's been mixed success with those. Giant catfish don't jump. They just don't. If you see that picture, I don't know if you can pull it up. There's a picture of the catfish being the size of a boat. They're near the bottom. They will not jump up a fish ladder. No way. And so different research and different solutions have to be found depending on the fish. They were saying that there's so little known about the fisheries in that area, they don't even know all the fish that exist in the Mekong yet. Not mentioning what their characteristics are, what their lifespan is, how they migrate, do they migrate, how they spawn. They don't know a lot of that information. So designing a dam that will accommodate all those fisheries right now seems uncertain.
Rivers in Brazil, so they have some experience where this hasn't worked as well in other places. Go ahead.
I think I forgot my question. I do have one for Julia, and then I'll come back to Ida's, I think. How effective do you think it was to take the eco-district framework, and what was the response to it in Hua Yan?
Well, I'll start by being really honest. I think one thing, there was definitely a translation issue, and that one of the things I realized in creating goals for cities is wordsmithing is a huge part of what we do, right? We have to get the right language. So it was somewhat difficult to translate some of the goals of their plans to the goals that we have set, and a lot of time was really spent in interpreting those ideas and saying, you thought our goals weren't adding up to this, but actually this is what we meant, and this does match the performance areas that you're talking about. So I think that discussion was fruitful in the end, because we spent so much time trying to figure out exactly where the goals were targeting. But the performance areas served as a really good organizing principle, because comprehensive planning is just somewhat new in terms of eco-city development. So I think we had to start somewhere that related to infrastructure, and I think that the concept suited well for infrastructure performance, which was really something that is being developed there, because they don't have a major roadway system, they don't have a major sewage system. So hopefully they'll be able to see not only the efficiency gains that performance areas get at, but also some of the environmental sensitivity issues too.
And then I remembered my question, Ida, regarding if I saw your graphs correctly, it seemed like I don't know if it's long term, I don't really understand the discount rate concept fully, but with the 10% discount rate, that there ended up being almost the only benefits were coming in aquaculture. Does that seem correct from what you saw?
So what the discount rate does is it's how much value you put on the future. So with a high discount rate, let's say the 10% here, you see that most of the value is put right in the beginning and then drops off really quickly. The lower the discount rate, basically, the longer term, the slower does that line go down. So you see 10%, 3%, 1%, and 0%. So 0%, the amount you value the future equals what you value the present, basically. So the reason that the fisheries went up, or the loss of the fisheries, was because more and more fisheries would disappear in the longer term as more dams went out. So the study was over 50 years, basically.
Okay, so what I was wondering about is who is standing to benefit in that region in the aquaculture
so
business?
right now the main people that benefit are the local communities and farmers that take a fishing pole or nets, go out there and just catch fish, bring them home, throw them on a frying pan or steamer or whatever. When it moves back to aquaculture, it'll be more like farms, where it's major farms that have basically farming fish and then sell them to the local communities. So no longer will those local communities be able, to get that protein. They'll have to buy it. And so the primary people that will gain from aquaculture is whoever owns the farm, basically. So corporations, rich individuals, et cetera, potentially the government, depending on how they're set up.
Keith, was it Northwest Lake?
Yeah, Northwestern Lake.
Was there resistance from, that you know of, from residents on the lake? Of course, they interviewed somebody who was like, a river.
Yeah, that was pretty
But I know that, like, on the Sandy Roslin Lake, and this came from a question online, there was some resistance to losing that. So I guess that's a small question, and then a bigger question for the panel would be, how can you account for that lost cultural value, either from building or taking out dams?
Just speak real quickly on that subject. Yes, there was some resistance, but in the end, there was really no decision. The decision was already made by Pacificor, because they have to be in compliance with the federal ESA guidelines, as well as the financial decision. Ultimately, that's what it came down to. So that in particular was the situation. And the Oregonian actually ran an article this last weekend that was really a great article. It looked at the situation from the perspective of a Yakima native man whose family had fishing platforms on the white salmon. And it also got the perspective of a fish biologist as well as a local resident. So that's a good material to look over.
I actually have a question for you. Following up on that, did they look at the changes in house values that were on the lake and are now on the river or further from the river? Have those changed?
I don't know that they actually looked at that. That'd be something for ISS to maybe tackle, economic perspective. But I did meet somebody a couple years back who actually owns property within sight of the dam, and he was very enthusiastic about it coming out. And I think it was actually going to swallow up, well, let's see. He was on the downstream side of the dam, so he's standing to lose a little bit of his property, but he was more than enthusiastic to give that up for the added fishing benefits and recreational benefits. I should say there's a lot of recreation that happens on that river, and it's only going to expand. I know there's some good economic data on the 4 different professional outfitters that operate on the river, so that's definitely an economic boon for the residents in the local area.
I figure I'd ask everybody a question. So on the Sandy River, and it's the Covis, whatever it is there a plan? Are there plans to artificially introduce new salmonids into the rivers, or are they going to just let nature take its course and do that? Also, is there a resident rainbow trout up? Was there a resident rainbow trout up in the reservoir and upstream that could become steelheads?
Can't speak about the latter issue, but there already is a hatchery on the river. So they're going to probably continue to supplement the wild stocks. But that's a really great question because there's a lot of work right now that's looking at how hatchery fish affect wild stocks, and it's generally considered a negative relationship. And then also just recently they discovered a pathogen that is going after some of the wild Pacific salmon stocks as well. So that's something to do close monitoring of.
Yeah, on the Elwha River, which is going to be, well, the dam will come out in the next couple of years. I think, the Caucasian fishing community is not very happy with the Indian community that wants to have a very large, the Native American community that wants to have a very large hatchery system at the lower end on it, I think.
A very interesting panel and collection of stories to weave together. Just a quick comment on the white salmon. The property, the houses right on the lake actually are on leaseholds with Pacific Power. So it's not actually householders, unlike your friend, who I imagine is quite excited about his new river. I had a question for you. I'm very interested in the extent to which you had obviously limited amount of time, but the alternative sources of energy, how much of the demand in the basin is what might be called constructed demand, and how much of it is legitimate long-term need? And did you have a chance to look at alternative sources of energy and any of those implications?
We did very briefly. We had an appendix that talked about potential sort of run-of-the-river hydro power producing plants. We looked at a little bit of solar and wind. It was a very quick look at it, so there is a full appendix. What we looked at probably, and it was a quick look, wouldn't produce as much energy as those 11 dams. So right now, Laos basically wants to be called the battery of Asia. And that's their long-term goal, is to provide all the electricity for that region. And so if they were to go with alternative forms, one, it'd take a lot longer. Two, they might not get as much energy and concentrated energy as they would with the hydropower. So There's been debates, but it's interesting because we looked at it briefly, but there hasn't been that much studies on let's say, what the solar potential or wind potential in that area is. So it is, if you do want to read more about it, there is a full 10-page appendix that we put into the report about exactly that.
No, I was just pointing to the appendix. Okay.
I'm Andrew McCullough. I just graduated in May from Civil and Environmental Engineering. I had a question concerning IDA's project. When you determined the effects of the different management scenarios with the, was like 3, 5, and 11 dams, how exactly did you go through and determine what the effects would be? I saw you had like stream bank erosion and loss of fish habitat, things of that nature, and then also, as I understand with sustainable development, it's really important to figure out what price tag you put on those different natural resources when it comes to developing policy and stuff like that. So how exactly did you determine, we lost 3,000 kilograms of fish, that costs this much money to the participating countries? Thanks.
So basically, to answer your second question first, it varied. So with for example, the wetlands, we used benefit transfer because we had so little time to do the report. There's no time to actually, do the work on the ground. With the fish, we looked at the market price of the current fish. So average price of various fish, and found that it was about $3 per kilogram. And they had considered under $1 per kilogram, so that was the difference. We didn't look much into we looked literally at fisheries, so captured fisheries, reservoir fisheries, and aquaculture, and we looked at wetlands. And so those were the only aspects that we looked at of the natural capital.
But you might be asking how those scenarios were developed, and is that right? I mean, the Mekong River Commission developed these elaborate scenarios about what might happen, and I think we just did is that what your question was?
Yeah, as far as, because some of the research that I was working on is kind of, we would be given these scenarios and we would be charged with, okay, what are the implications as far as water quality goes and things of that nature. And I didn't know if that was something you guys were associated with, or if they just said, these are the scenarios, these are the outcomes.
So we went off, there were two, the BDP was originally published about a year before we came into the scene, and those scenarios were developed by the 4 countries in the region, and there was about 10 of those scenarios that they developed. And what we did was we took those 10 scenarios, picked 3 of them, and then just looked at what assumptions were made in those 3. So we didn't change the scenarios or have any say in what they were.
However, we also recommended that they needed a much broader range of scenarios, that was a very narrow, within the sort of business as usual context, and they really need to broaden that out and look at a bunch of other things.
Hello, my name is Max, and my question is, after the dams get removed or demoed, all of the concrete gets put on the side bank, I guess, and it just let the nature do its thing. What are the environmental impacts on doing that, or is there another strategy to transport it, or is there cost associated with that?
I believe there's you can access that information on Pacificor's website. That's a really great question, and I think it's partly a financial decision not to transport all that concrete out because it's an enormous amount, but it's also somewhat of an ecological issue as well, rather than removing that urbanite and taking it to the landfill, disposing of it, just kind of letting it, break down. I don't know if anybody has any statistics on how long it takes concrete to break down in an environment such as that, straddling the Cascades. But I think that's ultimately the decision they decided to make, to just kind of use the resources that they already had, all that energy they expended bringing the concrete out there in the first place. So. But Pacificor's website has a lot of great information about the environmental impact statements that were prepared. This dam has been talked about being removed for a long time, and so a lot of that information is accessible. And this is a really great time for dam removal in the Northwest because a lot of these dams were built 100 years ago and they're coming up for relicensing right now. So there's some great footage as well of the Elwha being mechanically deconstructed. And in 5-10 years, I think we're going to have a dozen more dams coming out in this region, and look forward to the Klamath dams coming out in 2020.
Okay, if that was the last question, let's give another big round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much. And we have some snacks over here and drinks, and you can ask some more detailed personal questions.